Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with Hunt Primitive, where we entertain, educate, and inspire. And you're here because you're interested in primitive archery and maybe just getting started. So after this short intro, we are going to jump right into it. One of the most frequent questions I get from beginners is, where do I start? Because there are a lot of different facets to primitive archery that can be kind of confusing, and sometimes people just don't know the starting point, and that is what this video is about. So most importantly, to get started, what you need to do is simply start. Okay, it's that simple. You don't have to go a very specific route. You can just pick one thing that you're really interested in and then focus on that. And that would probably be one of my bigger suggestions, is not try to do everything at one time. I think focusing on that one thing is going to be pretty important, as opposed to just trying to do everything at once. So I would say step back, look at the whole thing of primitive archery and say, what am I interested in? Am I interested in making bows? Am I interested in just the shooting aspect? Am I interested in flint napping, making stone arrow points? Am I interested in the hunting? What is your number one focus? And then pursue that one. And of course, we also have a lot of other videos on this channel to help you get started in all those different avenues. So I'll be sure to drop links down in the description and occasionally on the screen so you can know what thumbnails to look for. So if you're interested in bow making, we've got a great bow making video. And that one's not too complex, but it's complex enough to get you a really well-performing bow. If you're interested in flint napping, and that's what really draws a lot of people into this, we've got a great flint napping for beginners video that has helped a tremendous amount of people. So of course we'll drop that link down in the description. And then really anything that you want to search on YouTube, you can type in Hunt Primitive and then what you're wanting to search afterwards. Hunt Primitive, how to make arrows. Hunt Primitive, make a stone knife. Hunt Primitive, how to hunt big game. Hunt Primitive, spot and stalk deer hunting. There's hundreds of videos that we have here on the channel. So if you're looking for something in particular and you want to keep congruent with my teachings in this channel, just type in Hunt Primitive and then your question into the YouTube search bar, and you'll probably pull up a whole bunch of our videos teaching you how to do all those little individual tasks. But the most important part is simply pick something you want to do and then just start from there. So that's the general direction that you're going to go. So we're going to cover a couple different ideas in this, and that is, one is if you're just getting started and you're purchasing stuff, and then the other side is if you're building stuff. And so there's going to be a little bit of that mixed in, so hang with us because it's probably all really good information packed together for you anyway. Alright, so now we can dive in just a little bit deeper into those individual facets, so be it bow making or flint napping or what have you. Deep dives are in those videos, but we're going to give you those general overviews and things to think about before getting started in general. So we'll start off with the bow. The bow is typically the most popular piece of the primitive archery set. Like I said, either that or the flint napping, and we'll cover that in a minute. But as far as the bow is concerned, you're going to want to get a bow that fits you, and that's going to be very difficult when you're just getting started. So when you start thinking about these high-end custom bows, and don't worry, because if you get on my website right here, HuntPrimitive.com, and you go look at the bows that we make, there's probably going to be some sticker shock that comes with it, okay? But going into a really expensive custom bow is not a good idea right off the bat, because you're not really familiar enough with what your true draw length is, and then also what your weight thresholds are, and what some of your other goals in primitive archery are as well. And so if you jump into a bow that doesn't really fit you and fit your need, you're not going to be able to really extract the performance from that bow that you would otherwise be able to if you knew all of these things because you had a little bit of experience. So I specifically recommend not buying a bow from me or one of the other higher end custom bow makers if you're just getting started. In fact, I don't actually recommend buying a wooden bow or a primitive bow to start with at all. I would recommend going with a fiberglass laminated longbow. Now, I'd probably stay away again from the big fancy customs unless you're just into traditional archery, but if that was the case, you're probably not watching this video anyway, or you've already clicked off to watch somebody talk about traditional fiberglass laminate bows. So this is for primitive wood bows. Now, I know that that's what you want, but my suggestion would be to probably buy either a lower end fiberglass laminated bow or buy a used bow. But a standard, say like a hill style longbow, nothing fancy, that's going to get you something a little bit more similar to a primitive bow, and you can get used to shooting that. You'll learn your draw length, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And also the best part about those bows are that fiberglass laminate bows are almost indestructible as far as how far you can draw them back. And so you can take all the measurements on your draw length all you want. You can do the wingspan tests, you can mock draw a broomstick, all of that stuff, and it's not actually going to give you an accurate draw length for shooting your real primitive bow. I see huge variances in draw lengths, and so it's really important to simply shoot a bow a while. Once you get used to shooting the bow, then measure the draw length, and we'll cover that again in just a few more minutes. But this is best done on a less expensive fiberglass laminated bow, because if you don't know what your draw length is, and say you buy a primitive bow that's maybe tailored to 26 inches and you pull it 28 inches, you could break the bow very easily. But likewise, if you have a wooden bow that say maybe is safe to draw all the way to 30 inches, but you only draw 22 or 23 inches, then you're going to have a really sluggish shooting experience, and it's going to be very underpowered. And either having an extremely underpowered bow or a bow that breaks is obviously going to give you a very bad taste in your mouth in regards to primitive archery. So if you jumped right into a bow that was a little bit more expensive or a wooden bow and it's not what you wanted, you're already not going to be having a good time with this, and you're probably going to quit, and I don't want to see you do that. I have a good friend in Donnie Wilkerson at Creekwalker Trading, and definitely not a paid ad at all. He's just a good friend of mine. He makes some hill style fiberglass laminated longbows. Maybe look him up if you're looking for one of those, or get, say, like on eBay or something like that, and look for just kind of a generic fiberglass laminated longbow, something like a Bear Montana or something like that. Before we talk about building the bow stuff, we'll talk about the draw length and why I recommended buying a cheaper bow to begin with. And that is because your draw length is really important. And we did discuss that if you overdraw a bow that's not tailored to that draw length, you can break it. And then if you underdraw it, you're going to severely rob all the performance out of the bow, and you're not going to see any sort of usable performance in a hunting application. You can still go out in the backyard and fling some arrows and have a good time, and if that's what you want to do, you probably don't need to ever get into a pretty serious custom bow unless you just want one. But the reason to start with that lower end bow is to start developing your shooting style. And so you can research whether you want to be more of a form style of shooter, or if you want to be kind of a short draw snap shooter, kind of like I am. That's kind of up to you, what you want to do and what feels best to you, and I'll let you make that decision. But like I said before about measuring your draw length, you could do the wingspan tests and do the math on that, but that isn't actually going to be what your real draw length is when you shoot. That's just kind of an estimate to get you into a fiberglass longbow, is really what that is. I've seen people that measure out that would say, yeah, I would definitely have a 29-inch draw length, and then when it turns out and they're actually here and they're shooting, they're only drawing like 24 inches. That's a huge difference in power band on a bow if the bow is not specifically built for that short draw length. So determining your draw length is really, really important for moving forward. You can get away without knowing it on the fiberglass laminated bows, and that's why I say to start there. So get that bow, shoot it a while, then when you're measuring your draw length, what I see a lot of people do is they'll either measure on an arrow, 1-inch increments on an arrow, or have somebody put a mark. But what they'll do is they'll pull the bow back as far as they can, and then they hold it, and then they mark the arrow and they measure it and they say that's my draw length. Now, occasionally, guys that are form shooters will pull the bow back and hold it at this draw length, measure it, and then that's what they're going to shoot every time. But what I've seen, probably 75+% of the time, is guys will measure their draw length by pulling it as far as they can, thinking it makes them some sort of more of a man to pull the bow further. Then when they're hunting, they compress up and their draw length shortens significantly. Maybe not just hunting, but just shooting in general. So now they're focused on the target. So instead of just pulling back as far as they can, and they're not accurate with it and they're not lining up, their stance changes, and then they're shooting and they're not drawing nearly as far as they were when they were mock drawing. And so they got a bad result by holding and pulling as far as they can, because that's not their true shooting draw length. So how to do that is shoot for a while. Shoot for a couple weeks if you're new to this, okay? Then have somebody come out and watch where you draw an arrow to. So what I would do is I would take one of your arrows, and from the inside of the nock that goes onto the string out, I would measure 20 inches, and then 21, 22, 23, and I would put lines and count them. You can even use Sharpies and use different colors so they're easier to see when you draw and release. And then where it comes to the back of the bow, give you a little example here. On my bow, it's a broken hunting arrow, but that works just the same. So typically you're going to measure from what's called the back of the bow, which is the spot that actually faces away from you. So if I'm shooting like this, this is the back of the bow. And so when you mark the arrow and you draw it back, wherever it comes to the back of the bow, and yes, I am fully aware it actually makes more sense to do it from the belly of the bow, but that's not the way the standard has been since forever. And so always measure from the back of your bow for your draw length. And so wherever it meets, that's your draw length. And so if you shoot for a certain amount of time, then have somebody come out and watch you. Now don't change your shooting style. Don't automatically start pulling harder, because now you're just skewing your results. You're getting a bad number and it's going to be inflated. What you want to do is just shoot naturally. Don't even tell them, or tell them not to tell you where you're drawing, because you don't want to be influenced by that. Just have them watch you shoot like 3 shots and then say, okay, what color line or what number did I draw to? And they're going to say right here. And now you know. And if you decide you want to try to change that number and lengthen your draw length, then that's fine. That's a different subject for a different day. But at least it's going to give you a baseline to say, I'm comfortable shooting this way. I like to shoot this way. My draw length's 24 inches or 26 inches or what have you. Then you can make a decision when you're ready to buy or build a custom bow. Then you can tailor build it to your draw length. You understand? Especially because when you think about the weights of a bow, you buy, say, a 50-pound bow at 28 inches, and if you're only drawing it 24 inches, you're losing a significant amount of power, and that's also going to now drop you down below a threshold that's probably reliable for hunting. So you went from something that if it was drawn to 28 inches, you'd have no problem hunting with it, but since you're only drawing 24 inches or 25 inches, now it's a little bit lighter, because you remember, the further you draw the bow back, the heavier the bow is and the higher the performance. Unless, of course, the bow is specifically built for that shorter draw length. Like this one here, my own personal bow, is only tailored to 24 inches because that's what I shoot, but it's really efficient at my draw length, and I've killed a lot of animals with this, including bison. So a short draw length doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it wrong. It just means you're shooting a short draw style. But you need to figure all of that out before you either build or buy a custom bow. So cheap bow, figure all this stuff out, then save that bow for playing around or give it to a friend, or sell it to somebody else that's just getting started. All right, now as far as getting into bow building, I've got books on my website, The Secrets and Science of Primitive Archery. This is going to be a really good one for basically overall primitive archery application. I also have a bow building book, and also I have the bow building videos here on the Hunt Primitive YouTube channel. So those will help you out a lot. Now, you will be overrun by a lot of different bow building books and videos, and a lot of them are pretty darn good. There are a few that are pretty awful, but for the most part, if you're watching a fairly established channel, you're probably going to get some pretty decent information overall. But if the more serious you get into this, I highly recommend this book, because it's going to teach you things that no other book or video is able to teach you, because there's a lifetime of information in this book about primitive archery and primitive hunting. So definitely consider that when you're ready to advance on. So getting started in bow building can be a little bit difficult, because you're going to hear a lot of people say start with a board and make a board bow. Other people are say, go straight into a stave. Osage is easier to work, hickory's more durable and forgiving. So you're going to get a lot of different opinions on that. Personally, I don't mess with board bows at all. To me, it teaches you a little bit about the tillering process, but it doesn't teach you anything about really bow making from a stave. So I would suggest skipping over the board bow idea, unless you decide you want to build that board bow basically as a replacement for buying a cheaper fiberglass laminated bow. So you may end up building a couple board bows before you get one that doesn't break on you, but then you'll have that lower end bow that you can shoot and get all your numbers off of. So I don't have any board bow building videos, because I'm not big into those, but you can find those, and that may not be a bad option for you. But as far as building from staves, which is what we specialize in, and a stave is basically a section cut out of a tree. So you're either taking the trunk of the tree and you're splitting it into sections, and then those are staves, or it's potentially a smaller tree and you're just turning that one tree into a bow. But that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about building bows from staves. And I would suggest that you start off with hickory. And the reason is hickory is not as tough to work as, say, like elm. And elm and hickory are going to perform very similarly, but the hickory is going to be easier to work. It's not as easy to work, say, with a draw knife as Osage is, but Osage is also a lot more expensive if you're buying it, and then you'll come to find out that Osage is a little tougher to find when it grows really, really straight. And so if you do have access to Osage, I would suggest saving that until you have made a few bows, and then you're ready to dive into working on Osage. Otherwise, you could probably go through some really premium stuff and end up with not very premium bows to start. So I would recommend going out, cutting down a hickory bow, and then also, as far as dry times, you can't build a bow from wet wood because it just makes a horrible bow. So you have a couple options. One, you cut it, you split it, you seal it, and you set it up for about a year, and you come back and you build a bow, or buy one that's already seasoned, or you can force dry it. And I have that information in actually my Stone Age bow building video, so we'll make sure that we make a note about that. You don't have to watch that whole video. There's a lot of good information in there, so maybe you do want to watch it, but it's all about building a bow with Stone Age tools, so that may interest you. But sort of at the beginning of that is when I take the piece of wood and then I build a fire and I force dry that wood over a period of a couple of days. And so you don't have to wait now a year to build a bow. You can cut a tree, and really within a week or two you can be building a bow, and that's what most people are going to want to do. So make sure you check that out and learn how to do that. But by starting with the hickory, it's going to be a little bit more disposable, but stay away from a lot of the other woods. I mean, you can tinker around with making them out of oak. You can make bows out of oak. I mean, you can make bows, I guess, realistically out of pine for that matter, but you're not going to have a good long-lasting shooting experience. I've used so many different woods, and if you have hickory and it's pretty common, then I would go with hickory. If you don't have hickory, then look for something like white ash. Oak you can kind of get away with a little bit. Black locust is another great option, but again, I would kind of treat that like Osage, maybe set that aside and save it. Stay away from your softer woods, stuff like aspens and willows and that kind of stuff. Coniferous trees, I would probably stay away from those. Cedar's not really a good option. Can make a very, very fast bow, but is very difficult to keep from exploding into a million toothpicks after X number of shots. But all those different bow woods are also listed in my books and some of the videos as well. Then as far as arrows go, when you're just getting started, buy a dozen just kind of cheap low-end arrows just to shoot with. And so how you're going to do that is pick a bow that's maybe, I would suggest, if you really plan on hunting with it, I would say pick something in the 50 to 55 pound range at 28 inches if you're just getting started out. And I know a lot of people would say we need to start lighter and build up, but honestly, unless you're got some sort of a disability or you're a pretty young teenager or whatever, if you're an adult, there's no reason that you can't build into a 50 to 55 pound bow relatively quickly. But the arrows you're going to get to match are going to be, spined basically to the same. So when you want to order arrows, people are saying, well, how do you order arrows? If you're shooting a 52 pound bow at 28 inches, then choose like a 50 to 55 pound spine arrow. So the spine is typically going to reflect the weight of the bow, but that's pretty easy stuff to figure out. So of course then with the arrows, if you go buy a really expensive set of arrows and you're not used to shooting, then you might get to where you start breaking some, or you start shooting and you start losing them, and that's going to kind of put a bad taste in your mouth again. So I would again stick with kind of lower end, just economy style of wood arrows. And I guess if you want to shoot something like carbons or whatever, just get started, that's fine too. But typically just lower end wood arrows just to get you out and shooting. If you don't really have a lot of shooting experience, then that's probably what you're going to want to look for. And then as far as targets are concerned, I usually recommend a couple hay bales stacked because it's a larger target, so it's not as easy to miss and lose your arrows. And also hay bale's not hard on your arrows at all also, and they last for quite a long time. But you can shoot whatever kind of targets you want. I just like stacked hay bales personally. Alright, as far as building arrows, what you'll find is a lot of people, they want to build the bow, but they don't really want to build the arrows, so they buy the arrows and then eventually they get into arrow building. And that's what usually most people kind of do. If you are wanting to jump into making arrows, it's really important to understand that making arrows is sometimes even more difficult than making a bow. Because if you make a bow, that bow kind of does the same thing every time. Where if you make arrows, that one arrow may do the same thing every time, but if you're trying to make 10 arrows, they may all do different things. So making arrows is actually tougher in many circumstances than making a bow. And so I would recommend really putting some time into researching, our arrow making videos or other arrow making videos before you really get started, because you can make something that looks like an arrow but may not fly like an arrow, if that makes sense. So just keep that in the back of your mind, but kind of the same thing. Take all of this as you want it. Just expect that it's going to have a learning curve to it. You're not going to just go out into the woods, cut some sticks, make arrows, and they're all going to shoot perfect. It doesn't really work like that. So expect to have some failures with your arrow making. All right, and then we'll jump in and cover the flint knapping, which I don't have to talk a whole lot about because we have that really, really well done flint knapping for beginners video. But a couple general overviews on flint knapping is some people pick it up, they watch the video, they get the tools, they get some good rock. It's important to start off with good rock because it's hard enough learning how to flint knap, let alone on just some really crappy rock. So having good rock and then good tools is going to make a big difference in your learning curve. Now, some people pick it up and they learn very quickly, and within even a couple of days, they're making stuff that is resembling some pretty decent arrowheads. And then there's other people that may flint knap for months and go through 25, 50 pounds of rock before they actually start producing anything. And that's normal. So it's not normal to not progress. So if you're not progressing, then you just need to go back and continue to watch the videos and learn, like, okay, this is what I'm doing wrong. Really try to dissect the video. And it's a long video, but it really dives into all the little intricacies of flint knapping and how to thin points and how to shape them and how to sharpen and all that kind of stuff. So it is normal for it to take longer than just a couple days. You're not going to get your kit and go, okay, cool, I'm going to sit down and make an arrowhead your first time. It's probably not going to happen. It's going to take some time. So expect that going into it. And then also, if you're looking for rock and tools and all of that, we have that here at HuntPrimitive as well to help you out. If you can get stuff somewhere else, that's perfectly fine. If you want to get stuff from us, hey, we appreciate it. This is what we do for a full-time living, is primitive archery, building, flint knapping, and hunting. So with that, let's move into a little bit more on the shooting and hunting, and then I think you're good to go. All right, now when it comes to shooting, there are going to be those mixed opinions on whether you should be a form archer or what your stances should be. If there's a lot of things that people say are bad habits that other people say, no, I don't think that's a bad habit at all. And so if you ever watch me shoot, you'll notice I'm not a form archer. I consider myself just a freestyle primitive shooter, but that also works really, really well for me. I've killed over 60 big game animals, and I've been doing this for a very long time. I shoot pretty well just about as good as anybody else. I'm probably not the best in the world. I mean, I definitely am not, but I don't strive to be that. I'm a hunter first and foremost, and my number one goal is to get into hunting ranges of animals, put arrows in them, and kill them. That's pretty much what I do. If you want to be the guy that can maybe shoot like 40 yards or 50 yards with a stick bow and you're lobbing arrows into targets, form archery might be for you. I've seen very successful form archers do very well hunting, and then I've seen very efficient freestyle primitive shooters like me also be very good at hunting. So I would say there is not one that's better than the other. Form shooter will pretty much tell you that form archery is better, and that's perfectly fine, but there's a reason that I don't shoot like that, and it's just simply not comfortable to me. So, and the reason that I bring that up is you may feel bullied at some time by some of the form archers that are very, if you don't do it like this, you suck. And that's not true at all. And so if you don't want to shoot like that and shoot form archery, then you don't have to, regardless of the bullying. You can be successful just shooting with your own style, whatever feels good to you. The important part is don't keep switching it up. Stay consistent with however you shoot. The important thing is to be consistent. So develop your style, decide what that is. If you want to go with form archery because you can follow like a checklist of things to do, some people's brains work like that. And they want to know, okay, I'm going to watch this video and now I'm going to do everything that he says to do, and then I'm going to be able to shoot this bow. And I actually recommend that for people that are maybe a little older, that are just getting started, and they're better served with that checklist. But people that start when they're younger can typically do whatever they want, and they develop into it really easily. I don't know why that is, but I've been shooting my whole life, really since too young to remember. So taking my style and then switching to form archery would be detrimental to me. So therefore, if you have a shooting style somewhat already developed, don't feel like you have to change to fit somebody else's narrative in their shooting experience. You know what I'm saying? Then as far as hunting is concerned, my recommendation would be make sure that either A, you get that book and really study it. You don't have to sit down and just read the entire thing at once. You can flip from chapters to learn. But don't be in a rush to jump into hunting without watching the videos or reading the book and digesting the content. Because if you jump into hunting and your bow is really not up to snuff, your points are not very sharp or they're dull, they have bad transitions, arrows aren't flying really good. You're going to have some bad experiences with hunting, and it's going to put a bad taste in your mouth with hunting with primitive archery gear, because I can tell you there's really not much worse than spending days and days at a time, and hours in those days, sitting in a tree stand or a blind, and a deer comes by and you shoot and you bounce an arrow off of a deer. Okay, I've been there when I was very young getting started, or only penetrating this far and not killing it. It's very frustrating, and that's why at times primitive archery and primitive hunting has gotten a bad name. But if you have all of the information in all the checklists, in fact, the great point to bring out here, I have right at the beginning of this book, it's called the answers page, and I've given this page to everybody, and you can pause it and you can read it, and that right there is going to tell you how fast your bow should be shooting with say a 500 grain arrow, and then it's going to give you dimensions on stone points and some other key factors. So if you just want the answers, you can see them on that answers page. But if you're going into the woods and your stuff isn't up to snuff, you're going to have a bad shooting experience, a bad hunting experience, and then you're probably not going to want to do this again. So before you take to the woods, make sure that you know what you're talking about and know what you're doing. Otherwise, not only is it, if you look at modern ethics, and is it inhumane to the deer and all that stuff, yes, but also you're going to have a bad experience with it, and then you're not going to want to do this anymore. So do yourself the favor and make sure that you know as much as you can before going and hunting. And that answers page is going to really show you a lot. So rewind, pause it, and then hopefully you can read that on the screen. And if not, you can get the book at HuntPrimitive.com. And in fact, on social media, I've shared that answers page as well. Okay, so I think we've covered pretty much everything. Hopefully this is a good start for you in getting started in your own primitive building and primitive shooting and hunting journey. So thanks for following along with the channel. And if it is your first time to the channel, please consider subscribing, helping the channel out, watching the videos. Really, we do this just to help you be more successful in your own primitive builds and hunts. So check out the other videos that we have, and hopefully you'll have an excellent season this next upcoming hunting season.